right, we're live. Hi, Thorsten. How are you doing?
Hi, Shannon. I'm fine, thanks. What about
It's
you?
I'm doing great, buddy. It's a beautiful Monday, or what is it today? Wednesday already? Wednesday morning here, Thursday morning here in California. And yeah, it's been a busy week. It's been a busy month. I think nothing like launching a new open source project in a company to keep you running around at all hours of the day. But excited to be
Yeah.
talking with you, my friend. We are really here to chat about your experience building on Acorn and working as a developer on the project, and then also this great blog you wrote a couple days ago that talks about what your experience is like when you build when you do your development yourself using Acorn. You used an example of a little Flask app that connected to some backend services, and I just really enjoyed the read. I thought it was very well written and kind of got into a lot of very detailed tutorial level content about how people could get comfortable with this and what some of the developer experience was like on Acorn. So I thought today we'd spend 15-20 minutes maybe talking through some of the same topics, but putting into video so people could find the tutorial and get into it this way as well. Maybe just give me a little bit of the background on the article. You wrote this about 2 weeks ago, and you've been working with Acorn now for a while. It's not as new to you as it probably was when you first started working on the project. But tell me about what kind of inspired this and what you were hoping to communicate.
Yeah, so actually writing that article was a great chance to get deep into what Acorn can do for you, especially as a developer. And I just started working with Acorn or having a look into it like a week before I wrote that article. And before that, I was using like the traditional tools to work with Kubernetes, like deploying Helm charts and kind of creating different values files for different environments there and to switch around and to customize everything that I can do about the configuration and the application itself. And when I first used Acorn, one of the first things I saw in the help text of Acorn Run was like this dev mode or interactive and the bidirectional sync, because that's exactly what I would love to see in an application environment on top of Kubernetes. So with the blog post, I actually created a Flask application and integrated it with the other external tools like Redis and Postgres in this case, because that's kind of the standard way I test new developer tools. Even back then, when I created the demo repository for K3D, my other project, I created like a Flask application. I tried to get hot reloading in there. I tried different ways of developing with this new developer tool. And Python and Flask is a good combination here because it supports live reloading. And that's always a super cool thing to show to people, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's what would be really fun today if you have something you can show us is maybe to kind of move out of the blog world and into the video world and just give us some examples of how you actually do this on a daily basis and something that kind of shows your work, if you don't mind.
Yes, of course. So we can actually go through that example that I stated in the blog. Is this the font big enough? Can you read it well?
Yeah, it looks pretty good to me. I hope it. Yeah, I think that's fine.
Nice. Okay. So let's just start. I have a fresh repository here. Well, it's not even a repository, just some ordinary folder. I installed Acorn with brew just before that. So scrolling up a bit, just brew install acorn.io CLI Acorn. So it's the latest release, Acorn 0.1.5. I made sure I'm not using a development version here, so I'm not spoiling you on new features. And in the other terminal window, I created a K3D cluster, which we will test on. So basic Kubernetes or K3S inside of Docker. And if you read the documentation of Acorn, you will also see K3D stated there. And one of the requirements is that you forward some port to port 80 at the load balancer just so that later ingress will work, like getting traffic into your cluster via domain. So cluster is up and running, so we're good to go. What we will do now is create a simple Python application I just created some folder structure here. Inside a Python folder, I have a source folder, and inside that I have an app folder. Init.py, just to initialize the module, is completely empty. We don't need that right now. And our main Python file is the app.py file. Up here, we just import some necessary evil. What this app will do is basically you have a web app.
Looks like we lost Thorsten. I still can see his screen. Let's see if I can get him back. Thorsten, you there?
I hope so.
We lost you a couple minutes ago. You kind of disappeared for a
Oh,
second.
yeah. I realized that.
You were
I
kind
was
of
so happy
walking
that
through
it
the app. I lost
works
you.
well.
I lost you.
I was so happy before that StreamYard works so incredibly well on my Linux Firefox combo.
You were
And now
all
this
excited
happened.
about it.
All right. So I don't know where you lost me.
Maybe just start over with the app. That's where I think we lost you. You'd kind of installed
Yeah.
all your necessary evil, and then you sort of dropped out as you were walking through the application.
All right. Nice. So basically what we will have here in the end is just some web page that shows you like a list of subscribers. And right now, up here, we just have some necessary evil imports, and we define an HTML template right in the file, some style, some CSS over here, the title of the page, and then everything that we will see on the page. So we will have a form where you can type your email and hit submit to subscribe yourself to a super awesome newsletter, and maybe you will even buy a washing machine or something like that. And if something doesn't work, we show an error message. And just below, not really GDPR compliant, but we will show the list of previous subscribers. All right, some Python code. Python is not my primary programming language, so I hope this is at least a bit idiomatic. We have some error definition over here. And maybe I will just go ahead and build it, right? So to show you, I don't need to walk through all the code here.
That'd be great. Thorsten, do you mind just if you can bump the size of the text up a little bit? I got a request from someone on the live stream to.
That better?
Certainly. I also minimized our faces so people can just see the screen.
All right. Now that's incredibly huge on my monitor. Okay. So now I will add something to it. Let's just copy over a Docker file over here. Is that correct? Is that the correct repository? I hope so. It's all right. So we have a plain Docker file. We are starting from a Python 3 Alpine image. Alpine just because it's tiny. We change to a working directory and /app. We set Flask up to run our app.py, and we want it to be served on all the interfaces. And this is something that's important just so that Python finds all the dependencies, all the modules. And those, here we add some operating system level like dependencies that are required in the Alpine image. This is only important later when we add Postgres in this case. Then we copy over everything that we have, and we install all the requirements that we have. We didn't create them yet, but we will do so later. We will expose port 5000 where Flask will be serving on, and yeah, just run our application based on what we defined by the environment variables. So we will need the requirements txt. I'm just copying that over. Usually I just use pipenv, and then like Python 3 rate, for example. Oops. wrong folder. So don't mind those two. And then install all the requirements here. But later for writing a Docker file for building the image, I just freeze the dependencies that I created and push them into a requirements file because that's like the default. Was it? No, it's pip and requirements like that. Correct?
Looks good.
Yeah, probably something's wrong, but I guess that should work. And as someone pointed out before already, this is kind of a bad thing because we will copy everything over and install the requirements. You could just copy over the requirements first, install them, and then copy over the code so that it doesn't have to rebuild on every change. I'm just gonna stick it with that right now. Just gonna build it over here. Let me close that small one. So I'm now building the application locally. Oops, forgot to forward the pod. All right. Now, obviously, I can not easily switch the windows to a terminal, so I'm just going to show you with curl. We see all the awesome HTML that we created before. All right, now that's locally in Docker. Let's deploy this to Kubernetes with Acorn. I have my Kubernetes cluster up and running here. It's a single node K3D cluster, version 1.24. And let me just show you Acorn version. And I'm going to install Acorn into that cluster with a simple Acorn install. And yeah, now what's important, and I completely forgot the command right now. In K3D's case, we want to have, is it that one? Oh, cluster domain, it is. What's important with local development environment is you kind of have to port forward so that you can locally access an ingress later on. Cluster domain. Luckily I have it saved in my history. So this just tells us that every endpoint that Acorn creates should be exposed on .local.on-acorn.io and port 8080, which is the port that I forwarded earlier when creating the K3D cluster. Local.on-acorn.io will always resolve to localhost, so that's super convenient for local development. We wait a few seconds for Acorn to be installed in the cluster, and you see it's super fast. Now, what we need to build a new Acorn is an Acorn file. And this is one of the things that I love the most, right? When I started my software development journey a few years ago, I was in a company that built on top of Docker Compose all the time. And so this was super convenient, and you could just bind mount your source directory into it, and it will hot reload the code, and everything was super nice and awesome. And then we moved to Kubernetes, and at first it was like crazy difficult to get anything running there. And now with Acorn, we get merged like the simplicity of Docker and especially Docker Compose with the flexibility of a new markup language in a single file, and we don't have to write all the huge YAML files and have indentation errors and stuff like that. So that's what I love the most about Acorn. Let's start, and the minimum thing that you have to write in an Acorn file to create an Acorn is at least one container. In this case, we call the container app, and we build it from the current directory. All right, that should be it. So there are different multiple things that you can do now. You can start by building it first. Oops, there's a unexpectedly. Did I do something wrong? Boop, 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 boop. Containers. this. Sorry. Okay, I could have read the error messages. It's not indentation, but at least it tells you exactly where you find it, right? So let's just build this. And what Acorn does in the background now is it starts a build kit daemon inside your Kubernetes cluster, which is great. You're not actually building locally, and then you have to push to the remote daemon. And that happens if you create the stuff in different directories. Sorry for that. And then it sends your local context that you define here to the remote build kit instance to build it, and then it stores it right in the registry that's also deployed alongside the build kit daemon inside your Kubernetes cluster. So no build push pull cycles anymore, just builds directly in the cluster. Okay. So now you could run the image that's now defined here by that SHA, or you could just run with acorn run dot, which is even easier. That will also build in the background if you need it. Let's hit Acorn Apps to see. Oh yeah, nice. We have our app running here, but oh no, there's no endpoint. That's just because I didn't specify anything. So remember back here in the Docker file, we're exposing port 5000. So let's just add it here. Ports. And I could write an object here, but you can also squash everything into one line if you want. And in this case, we want to publish the port. So there are different modes to use in Acorn, like having it private internally, so it's only available to other containers in the Acorn, or to have it exposed by a load balancer, or with publish, you can get it exposed publicly. In this case, we are specifying port 5000, and we tell Acorn, that it's an HTTP port, and this will make it create an ingress object for us. Let's do that again. Or actually, I'm not going to. Acorn build dot. You could just run it again, but that will create another Acorn app instance for you. So we are now going to update the existing cool bird one. Okay, that didn't. Dash image, we copy over the image ID, and we tell it to update our winter wave app instance. You already seen my autocomplete before. That didn't really work. That you could just combine that into a single command, which is even cooler. How did I come up with winter wave now? And you see that Acorn even has the amazing auto-generated names from that Docker also had. Don't mind this error message here. That's just because of the pipenv that is failing some shell magic. All right. Now, there we go. We updated our app instance, and now we have an endpoint that's auto-generated for us, local on Acorn 8080, and we should be able to hit that. Just because I don't want to switch these shared windows now, I'm just gonna call that for you. And there we go. We see the same awesome HTML. No worries, later I show you the rendered version.
Looks good, Thorsten. I mean, this is looking great.
That's great. Okay, now I'm gonna change the order a bit. In the blog post, I first integrated it with other pieces, but what we want to do now is to see the awesome development mode that I bragged about in the beginning in action. So what does that mean? That means, let me just show you here. I do acorn run -I for development mode dot, and we'll do exactly the same as before. It will build the acorn and deploy it, and then it will continue to stream the logs of all containers that are defined in our acorn to your local machine. And we'll also give you status updates saying, hey, the app is not yet healthy, you don't have an endpoint yet, And then at some point it's all green and nice and says, yeah, you have your endpoint here and everything's healthy and up to date. Now we can do something cool. Let's just say, do I have an os get in? Okay, I tried more simple. Let's just say we want to change some environment variable in our Acorn file, environment, and I'm just gonna say configure Flask, debug 1. So I just want to enable the debug mode in Flask, and I just hit Control S to save now, and we will see, well, Acorn was watching our local directory and it sees that the Acorn file has changed, and this will trigger a rebuild of our Acorn, deploy to the cluster, and update the running version, and there we go. Our application was redeployed in a matter of seconds. The debug mode was turned on based on our Flask debug environment variable, and there we go. And the same actually happens if you update something in the Docker file. Now we turned on the debug mode in Flask, and that means Flask itself will watch its own source files, and if you change something there, it will also change in the deployment. It will just reload the web server, basically.
So at this point, you have basically a full circle where you can code, develop, make changes, and see them live in your deployed environment. Right, Thorsten?
Yeah, that's exactly, but there's just one thing missing. You see, if I just type something here, let's, for example, change the title of the page, also demo, and I hit save, but nothing happens. It just didn't see what's happening here.
Mm-hmm.
So when you enable the development mode, what Acorn does in the background is you can specify arcs to your Acorn app, which is something that you can expose to end users. They can run, say, Acorn run your Acorn image -- help, and they will get a help text of arguments that you can set. And there's a built-in argument, which is the dev mode. So you could kind of write it like this or create a profile for development mode options, but that's already built into Acorn itself. So when you use the -i flag or -- development, I think it is, Acorn will internally set args.dev to true. And you can make use of that right here in the file. You're going to specify another stanza, which is dears. In here, you can tell Acorn to create volumes and bind them into your directory, into some directory inside your container. In this case, we will sync to the source directory. I hope that's the correct one. Let me just double check that in my side window. No, it's just the app because we copy over the source. And I want to copy it from my local directory. So this will already work. And this is not using the args.dev now. But you can see everything is redeployed. Development is still active. And I just go here. Oops. Which one is the right one? This one, right? We still see here, awesome demo. And now switching back to the dev mode, I can go here and change it back to awesome Acorn. And you see, whoop, now Acorn actually detected that we are changing something that is synchronized into our Acorn app. It says, oops, changed source app.py. We're going to upload that. And then inside the container, Flask will see, wow, that file changed, and reloads the web server. So we can go here, do another curl, and then we should see awesome Acorn again. So that's live changed. Now, this is super cool for development and extremely convenient, especially if you have, like in this case, a framework that supports hot reloading. But you don't want that in production, right? And you also don't want Flask debug setting in production. So let's just do this. One of the things that I told you before, the Acorn markup language is super convenient. I should turn off this copilot thing that I was testing. That's a bit distracting. Does anyone know how I can do that? It just doesn't do it. All right. Anyway, so I can just say if args.def, that's good enough. Only then we want to do this. Boop. Just some indentation for the feeling. And that's cool, right? So in Docker Compose, if you have different environments, you would usually use like Docker Compose override files or like similar concept to customize. Or in Helm, you have different values files that you use. And in the Acorn markup language, AML, you can just use conditionals right in here. You can also use loops in here and other control functions, and also some built-in functions to generate text and so on and so forth. So now, if I run acorn run-i, it will set the args.def to true internally, and this will insert our debug mode and our volume mount or directory bind mount. So if I just do the normal acorn run dot, this won't happen, right? So I can acorn apps. We have small c. It's running already. Acorn exec env, and there should not be a Flask debug environment in here, and it's not because we only do that if development mode is active.
That's great, Thorsten. So with this type of an approach, you can basically work the same Acorn file that you're going to use in staging, testing, production, any other environments while you're working it in a dev environment, so that as you pull it out and you're developing, you just say, hey, I'm in developer mode now. It's going to give you these debugging tools and other things so that you can do real-time changes and see how they'd work on your local machine. I mean, this seems like you're getting to a point where you're as a developer working on your deployment are kind of benefiting from the power of Kubernetes actually locally, because you're doing your builds in Kubernetes. You're able to get, you can test this at some more scale than you might on a local environment if you wanted to connect to multiple services. Can you use some of these args as well as you move between, say, a local database and a potentially a production database, or a test database and a production database, or even a cloud service or something like that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you can specify a complete database container right here next to it, and then you can toggle that with an if else, for example. Let's just define args and I don't know, DB connection, whatever. You can completely specify like a whole object in here. You can specify just a connection string in here, and depending on whatever your user sets here. Let's just show that. I'm just gonna put something here. Define database connection. I'm not gonna demonstrate the switch, but you can obviously now use the if conditional to either insert the whole database container or just place like an environment variable defining the DB connection string in here. But I can show you how that looks like.
No, I think it's good. I mean, I think we're probably going to run out of time in a couple minutes, but it seems like it'd be quite flexible for you as a person working in your environments to build up a relatively complex, kind of cloud native type of app, but potentially use different approaches when you're working on it locally versus what you're going to use as you pass it down the pipeline, as other people touch it and use it, without having to develop different implementations of the deployment scripts.
Yes, exactly. Just one thing that I wanted to show here is how you can expose arguments to end users. So let's just say you built your Acorn, it's finished, you want to share it with your friends and family. And so you just build it and you push it to some OCI registry that could be like Docker Hub or the GitHub Container Registry or GCR or whatever. And then people can just type Acorn run your image. In this case, it's a SHA. Obviously, you can properly tag it with a human readable name. And now they could go to your website or to the project site and read what can this thing do. Or they just type Acorn run your app-help and will show you everything that your Acorn exposes, like which volumes it needs, which secrets, what kind of containers it runs, what ports are published, and then the arguments that you expose. For in this case, DB connection, and it takes a string that's inferred from the default value that we put here, and then it takes just this comment to define the help text. So that's super simple to share your Acorn with others.
That's awesome. So you mentioned that you were using kind of live reloading languages here. What would things be like if you had a framework or a language that didn't support live reloading?
Good question. And as if I was prepared, I have this Go folder up here. And you may know Go is like a compile language, and then you may just have like some CLI application, no web app. And let's just create one of those. We have a single main.go file, package main, and then some function, also main. And in there, we just print hello world, and then we sleep for a minute. Oh, that doesn't work, right? So it's ft dot. See, that's a problem with Copilot. And you can just run it, just switch there. Hello world, and it will sleep a bit. Let's put a Docker file around that. Docker just from Golang. This you can ignore. From Go, we copy everything over, we build it, and our entry point is just main. Whoop. Hello world, that worked. Now let's push that thing into Kubernetes with Acorn. Same thing here. Is that the correct one? Yeah. Just ignore that part for a second. I'm gonna remove that. I'm gonna remove that. So just as simple as the one before. Oh, let's actually go direct to the dev mode.
So in this case, Thorsten, what's happening in the background there? It's actually building everything and compiling it?
Yeah, so it's using a Docker file to build the image and deploys it just as we did that before in the normal mode in our Python application, and deploys it. And you will see here, once it's ready, it should output our log message. And yes, here it is. And it starts synchronizing. And we also specified our bind mount here of our of our directory, and it will also recognize that and synchronize it. But obviously now the problem is it's a compiled language, right? So you need some step here in between, or you have to change your application in one way or another. So it's not as convenient as with a completely live reloading framework, but there's something cool that you can do in exchange. So basically, I guess for every language, there's kind of one tool that can do something based on watching the file system. And in this case, there's library Go, and there's some Node.js thing that can do it cross-platform and for every language that you have. and we just define another target in our Docker file, which is the dev target. And the dev target is also just a Go image in which we install the Go module that and run that. And what it will do is just watching the local file system and then run our main.go file. So does the same thing. Oops, get some output here. That shouldn't matter too much. Should still work. And now we go to our Acorn file and we say if args.dev, if we are in development mode, then we want to actually build a different target of our app. And in this case, it's the dev target.
Nice. And so with that, you're basically getting the same real-time like experience you had in Python, but with Go.
Exactly, that's the plan.
All right.
And I hope I didn't have a typo in here. Oh, I forgot to create a Go mod file, but that's an easy thing.
Nice. Nice. Thorsten, Charles asked what VS Code plugin you were using for the Acorn file.
For the Acorn file,
Yeah.
right now it's there's no plugin. It's just plain syntax highlighting for Q in this case. Or you can do it with Q or JSON. And I guess at some point there will be a proper one for the Acorn markup language.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're running out of time, Thorsten. Maybe we can wrap up with just a little bit more on, kind of what you're working on right now, what's coming down the pipe, things that you're excited for as a developer who works in this all the time. What do you see as some of the things that you'd like to see added for a developer experience into Acorn?
I guess just as you see here, you have to do some tricks to get to have a statically compiled language have the same convenience as interpreted language like Python with a cool framework like Flask. So kind of like hooks that are triggered or based on what you see, what is synchronized or where you see change, it will execute some command. For example, in Acorn, you can define jobs here, which are basically compiles to Kubernetes jobs or cron jobs, and they can be triggered on a change to the Acorn file. It would be cool if those could actually be triggered on the change to a source file. That's a cool thing. Some things that I'm working on currently are pre-flight and in-flight checks. Like when you run Acorn install, it will tell you, hey, your cluster is not ready to run Acorn because it's missing this and that feature. For example, you don't have an ingress controller installed. And the most recent addition is, for example, on Docker Desktop, by default, it's not shipping with an ingress controller. So you can install it via plugin, or Acorn will just install it for you. Before it was Nginx, and since that was fairly slow in our experience to push IPs to the ingresses, it's now using traffic. And that's some stuff that I'm working on.
Awesome. Well, Thorsten, this has been great. I really appreciate you going through all of this, writing the blog. Everyone can find the blog at acorn.io/blog, and there's a lot of detail and walks through all of the basics. And if you haven't had a chance already to get started with Acorn, the easiest place is just go to acorn.io. You can find the download and the getting started guide, which takes you right into our docs. Really makes it very easy to come up with kind of some understanding of what Acorn is and the details on how to get started with it. So Thorsten, thank you. Hopefully we'll have you back on the live stream soon again to talk more about kind of making Acorn as developer friendly as possible. But
yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been great. I appreciate you getting on here in the evening, your time in Germany, and your little son didn't yell or scream. You're 6 weeks old. I expected we'd hear him at some point, but sounds like he's already pretty well behaved little boy.
Yeah, my wife is taking care, and I don't hear them with those headphones. So. Yeah, it's pretty relaxed.
Thanks a lot. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and we'll be back again next week, I'm sure, with another live stream. Have a good day. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Bye. Have a nice one.